Deep in the forests of the Yucatan, Mexico, a group of Maya rebels are fleeing from a vastly superior squadron of Mexican soldiers. They are outnumbered, outgunned, and on the verge of defeat. For refuge, the Maya take cover in an inconspicuous cave. It's here that the rebels find the unexpected: a wooden cross, a literal sign from God. To their amazement, the cross speaks aloud to the Mayan people. Do not run. Do not fear. I am with you. I am the voice of your ancestors and the power of the true God. This land is yours. It was given to you from the beginning, from the roots of the ceiba tree to the waters of the sacred wells. The Ladinos, the Mexicans, the Yucatecos, they are intruders. Do not surrender your homes, your families, or your maize. Stand, take courage. Tomorrow, when the soldiers come, you will rise like the jaguar from the shadows. You will strike, and they will fall. You are the chosen ones, the Kruzab, the people of the cross. These are the inspired beginnings of the Mayan cult of the Talking Cross, an unexpected religious movement that would ignite a Maya rebellion that would ultimately claim 50,000 kilometers of Mexican territory, known across the world as the State of the Cross. The story of the Talking Cross or Speaking Cross comes to us from a unique period of Mexican history. Mexico, Central, and South America were totally conquered by the European Spanish by the late 1500s. With them, they imported African slaves who, along with the Spanish, would intermix with the native populations, creating racial tension that would eventually be addressed by the institution of a caste system. The system essentially worked as follows. At the top of the hierarchy were the Peninsulares, or Spaniards born in Spain, followed by the Españols, Spaniards born in the Americas. After that, the admixtures of the three racial groups were ranked: the mestizos, or half Spanish, half indigenous, then the mulattoes, or half Spanish, half African, followed by the indigenous Maya and the other tribes, and finally the Africans and other enslaved peoples at the bottom of the hierarchy. This doesn't even include the different mixes of the already mixed people like the Zambos, Castizos, Moriscos, or subsequent mixtures of those mixtures, making the ranking that much more complicated. And forgive my pronunciation. The caste system persisted until the 1800s and naturally emphasized racial grievances between the different groups. Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, and the system was abolished on paper. However, there were still policies in place that, in reality, sought to exploit the lower castes. The Indians were made to pay tributes that the Spanish and mestizos did not. They were mostly barred from any political positions, and there were taxes imposed by both civil and church authorities that contributed to the Maya being perpetually impoverished. This is an oversimplification, but eventually these resentments manifested in Maya rebellion, beginning what became known as the Caste Wars. So many Maya rebels, mainly rural villagers, began to rise up, particularly in the Yucatan Peninsula, marking the beginning of the Caste War in 1847. In the first 8 years of the war, over 300,000 lives were lost. Now, this is where the legend takes place. There are two versions of the story. The first is mentioned at the start of the video: a group of Maya are in retreat being pursued by Mexican forces. The Maya take refuge in a cave where they stumble upon a large wooden cross. Either through supernatural intervention or a talent for ventriloquism, the cross speaks to the group of Maya, basically saying to them, "Don't be afraid, God has chosen you. Continue your fight. This land is promised to you." The second version of the story is slightly different, but the Maya received basically the same divine message. A group of Indians had gathered near a sacred well where they erected a simple wooden cross. The cross begins to speak to them and tells them to continue their resistance against the mestizos and the Spanish. In this version of the story, I can't help but picture one of the priests at the bottom of the well, trying to keep himself afloat while delivering his message, but that's just something I found funny. The site becomes known as Chan Santa Cruz, or Little Holy Cross, and is still there today in Quintana Roo, Mexico. Originally, there was supposedly a small, possibly wooden site of worship, but this location and design are really lost to time, unfortunately. The religion becomes a true rallying point for the indigenous, and the followers become known as the Kruzab, or People of the Cross. What this does is establish a political and religious legitimacy for the Maya rebellion leaders and to foreign powers. The Maya can now claim divine justification for their cause. Regardless of the origin of the message, this moment became the kindling for the entire Maya resistance and became a perfect synthesis of the Catholicism the Maya had been exposed to and their native pagan beliefs. The Christian symbol of the cross becomes married to the Mayan religious symbols, particularly the Maya world tree, or the cosmic axis that links heaven, earth, and the underworld. From this point, the Maya begin to overtake the Mexicans and ultimately take the entire southeastern quadrant of the Yucatan Peninsula. They use guerrilla warfare and are eventually able to drive out all mestizo and Spanish influence from the region, making Chan Santa Cruz essentially an autonomous Maya zone. The 1850s to the 1880s are considered the height of their power, and at this time they control around 50,000 square kilometers of territory. They also control several access routes to British controlled Honduras, which makes for the beginnings of a long standing, unlikely partnership between the groups. The British supply the Maya with guns, and in return, the Maya trade logwood, mahogany, gums, and other goods. The British also internationally recognized the Maya State of the Cross, likely in favor of a buffer state between their territory and Mexico's. All the while, the Maya are also raiding the Mexicans, collecting alcohol, food, guns, and religious artifacts that will adorn their churches and serve as important religious totems going forward. At the beginning of the rebellion, there were estimates of 350,000 to 400,000 Mayans living in the occupied Yucatan. By the turn of the century, the estimates are that the population in the same area had dropped to around 30,000 to 40,000 people. This is because of the casualties from war, disease, Indian flight into other territories, and also because the war disrupted farming cycles, leading to widespread famine. After decades of fighting, the Mexicans under the command of General Arturo Bravo finally take over the stronghold and retake possession of San Santa Cruz, the Little Holy Cross, in 1901. At this point, it's likely that the shrine that the Maya had made was destroyed, but the Mexicans replaced it with their own Chapel of the Talking Cross, which is supposedly built on the same site. There's even a new cross inside, but it's likely not the original. So, what of the original Talking Cross? What happens next is mostly in the realm of legends and speculation, but we do know that a huge population of Maya fled after the Mexicans retook their territory, and they took with them their new religion and many artifacts. Because of communication barriers and the reclusive nature of the Indian peoples, especially after fighting a brutal war for decades, it is difficult to nail down exact details and timelines in a traditional historical sense. Some versions of events claim that the original cross was taken and split into three, each of which were fashioned into a new cross used for worship at one of three new central churches in remote jungle strongholds, mostly inaccessible today. These three new churches, although other sources claim there are more, are in, and forgive my pronunciation, Champon, Chanuca, and Tixcaco Guardia, where today the religion of the Talking Cross is still said to be practiced. Has anyone visited these sites? Very little academic work has been done exploring the descendant churches of the Talking Cross. There is an account from author, treasure hunter, and self made archaeologist Robert Marks. However, Marks is a bit of a sensationalist, so interpret his story however you feel appropriate. Marx's story goes like this. In 1958, the then young explorer was living in Cozumel Island, where he spent his time diving for treasure and looking for archaeological evidence of pre Columbian discovery of the New World. Alone on an excursion in the Guantanamo Roo jungle, Marx got lost. In the distance, he saw a smokestack, and he followed it to discover the settlement of Champon. Marx is greeted by 6 Indians, who took his rifle and pistol, then tied him to a tree. He attempted to explain his situation in Spanish, but nobody was able to understand him, as they only spoke Mayan. Eventually, as Marx is basically dying from thirst, an elderly Indian approaches, has him untied, and brings him into a thatched hut where he's given food and water. The elderly Maya speaks Spanish and explains that he is the chief and that Marx has come to one of their most important religious centers. Normally, no outsiders are permitted, and that the high priest even wanted Marx killed for entering. The chief goes on to explain that he's what's called the Tatik, or the community leader, but that wasn't always his path. He was born Juan Baptista Vega, born in 1888 on Cozumel Island. As a child, he, his father, and 2 other men went on in search of treasure off the coast of Quintana Roo. After landing on the coast, the party was ambushed by a group of Indians and the 3 adults were killed. Juan Baptista was spared because of his young age and his ability to read and write. Within a few years, his ability helped see him rise through the ranks of the community, becoming the secretary to Florentino Quituk, the old Tatik. In 1955, upon Quituk's death, Juan Baptista Vega assumed the role. Marx is then given some information about their Talking Cross churches and religion. At this site, there were supposedly 2 holy books. The first was written shortly after the Mexican retaking of the Mayan territory. It was composed of Mayan hieroglyphics mixed with Latin characters, made of tree bark coated with a chalky material. The second book was called the Book of God and was filled with language resembling modern Mayan, dealing primarily in religion and prophecies. The books are read from during the Talking Cross Masses by the Tatik. Today, there are actually only 4 surviving original Maya books in existence. There are 4 codices written on bark paper preserved in Madrid, Paris, Dresden, and Mexico. Although we've been able to decipher a good portion of what's in these codices, Having access to a text written in both Maya and Latin script could prove to be extremely useful. Marx is eventually allowed to leave. The chief gives him two guards who serve as escorts, and they travel for 3 days through the jungle until they reach where his boat was originally anchored. In 1960, a group of missionaries at the behest of Father Bernard Nagel journey back to Champagne where Robert Marx had visited. Despite initial protests, they are allowed to enter the site by pretending to be British. They even bring a picture of Queen Victoria. It's then that they discover Tatik Vega is dying from a stomach hernia and a mouth tumor. The group arranges for Vega to be airlifted to a hospital back in Mexico City where he's treated. He returns to his Indian community, but finally dies in 1969. Still curious, Marx ends up making a journey to the other sites of Chanca and Guardia some years later. He's told that because the Vega has passed, it will be almost impossible for him to enter any of the sites, let alone the churches. Regardless, Marx embarks on his second visit, starting with the religious center at Chanca. This time, Marx is not alone, and he copies the plans of the missionaries, pretending to be British ambassadors of the Queen of England. They are initially allowed to enter the community by presenting small gifts, like bells, and almost make it to the church, but are stopped at the last minute by the high priest's wife. The priest's wife says that her husband is away and that they'll need to wait for him to return before entering. After days of waiting, the high priest returns to find Marx taking Polaroid pictures of the people of the tribe. Marx is able to convince him to allow their entry by trading a photo to the priest of himself and his wife. For the first time allowed to enter one of the churches, Marx claims that the building was extravagantly lined with artifacts almost certainly taken from the Mexican Catholic churches during the Indian raids of the Caste War. There is jewelry, statues of saints, tabernacles, and so on. Marx and his party attend their version of Mass, which is in many ways similar to a Catholic Mass. Marx has learned a lot from the trip, but is prohibited by the tribe's people from taking any photographs inside the church. Robert Marx and his party next travel to the site at Guardia. Again, they pose as Brits and pull the same routine, gifts and Polaroids for the Indians. They are able to attend their masses and even look at their holy books, which he claimed pertained, somewhat obviously, to religious matters and predictions about the future of their people. Lastly, Marx returns to the site he accidentally found years prior, Champagne. He follows the same routine and is allowed to see a mass, but when he asks to see the holy books, the tribe leaders demand cases of rifles and shotguns from the queen as a trade, but Marx obviously cannot oblige. And this ends his second journey. So this story was totally new information to me, something I came across while reading for another video idea. So if I'm missing a piece of the story or a particular piece of information, feel free to let me know. Today, the cult of the Talking Cross is still estimated to be some tens of thousands strong in the area. The cult provided the religious foundry, identity, and spiritual vigor needed for a less militarily sophisticated people to overcome all odds and defeat the much better armed and trained Mexican military. The story continues to intrigue 200 years after it began, and is certainly one of the most interesting places Christianity has ever been taken.